Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're pleased to start this alumni weekend event. Aviva?
Okay, great. It's so tempting to do what Gower just did and welcome each one of you individually. Thank you so much for coming. It's so amazing to see so many of Kathy's former students here and her colleagues and others. It tells you something about what an impact she's had on the Purchase community. For those of you who studied with Kathy, she needs no introduction, but let me just review a couple of highlights from her amazing career as a scholar and a teacher and a writer. So Kathy was recruited to Purchase in 2000, right? Based on her national reputation as a true innovator in the fields of rhetoric and composition, as well as for her scholarly work on James Joyce, cultural studies, and pedagogy. Her many publications include the Culture of Reading and the Teaching of English, and co-edited MLA volumes on teaching Italian-American literature, film, and popular culture, and teaching James Joyce's Ulysses. And many of you who are here were part of her classes on exactly these subjects. Kathy also edited the volume that was used for years as the college writing textbook at Purchase, Reading Our Histories and Understanding Our Culture. In addition to her books, she's written many essays on ways of teaching college students to love and be good at reading and writing. And that has been one of her greatest successes. Her innovative pedagogies helped shape the literature and freshman composition programs at Purchase. They altered classroom practices throughout the college and inspired students and faculty alike for 2 decades. More recently, Kathy has turned to fiction, and her first novel, Dodging Satan, My Irish Italian, Sometimes Awesome But Mostly Creepy Childhood, has won numerous awards, and she continues to work on her fiction. So I'm so pleased to have Kathy here in conversation with me tonight, and also with 7 of her wonderful alumni to talk about her teaching and impact. So just to give you a sense of how this is going to go, Kathy and I will start with a conversation between the 2 of us. Then Kathy will open to conversation with the alumni panelists, and then we'll open the floor to all of you for your questions and reflections. And if you could please stay on mute until the Q&A, that would be great. Okay, thank you so much. Kathy.
Thank you, Aviva. You're so supportive, and that was an incredible introduction, and you're really, the whole event is very moving. I also want to thank Nadej for inviting me from the alumni committee, Stacy for giving us more tech support than I ever imagined we needed, and the incredible panel of alums that you're going to get to hear really soon. Finally, I also want to thank Purchase College for providing wonderful conditions for so many of us to thrive in. So you want to ask me?
I do, yes, I have many questions for you. Okay, first, I was hoping you would talk about learning communities. So how did running a first-year learning community each year and living on campus play a role in your teaching?
Not at all. I was thrilled when I was hired to be asked to run a first semester freshman learning community. I'm very sorry that my allergies are playing up. I just want to get my timer on. The point of a learning community is to have a small number of students living together and taking classes together. And at Purchase, we had 7 learning communities of 20 students who lived together and took 2 classes together. And in my learning community, students took an intensive writing class with me, and they took a capacious literary class with Lee Schlesinger. The goal of a learning community is to make the living and the learning sides of campus meet, so that students in social settings can be talking about academics. In academics, they can really feel like they're developing friendships. In addition, a faculty member has to live on campus for this to happen, so that somebody can be around to be more open and available to the students. So my husband, who ran a separate learning community, and I, and initially our 10-year-old child moved into campus, into the new in 2000, And I have directed a first-year learning community for 15 years. Obviously, if you live on campus, you expect to have a lot of interaction with your students. And there were days that Gary was seeing his students in his study. I was seeing the students in the living room. Many of you may remember, there were knocks at the door continually. It was like, oh no, I'm not done. Is it for him? Is it for me? Who is it? And of course, the cat was there to greet everyone. Yes, we got many condolences when she passed. But what we didn't expect, and what I particularly didn't expect, and this explains the whole night thing, is that of course students were working on drafts at midnight. Now they obviously weren't going to knock at my door and bother me. No, they're pretty respectful, but my light was on, so they knew I was up. They felt completely comfortable emailing me. And since I'm a night owl, I felt completely comfortable going over their papers. So I would track edit them, send them back. They would wake up to a paper with all sorts of comments in their inbox for them to see at whatever moment in detail in their busy daily life that day, well, probably within 2 hours, they wanted to look at. And then in a couple of days, they would get a hold of me, maybe come over to the house and ask questions, maybe just email me, and then they'd write another draft. And this would go on for quite a long period of time. But what I found is the work they were producing was incredible. And so my goal became to turn all of my classes into learning communities. And for tonight, just for purposes of not being too broad, we're going to primarily focus on the Joyce class and Colloquium 2, an Introduction to Cultural Studies.
So Kathy, can I pick up on something you just said about turning all classes into learning communities? How is that possible without people living together? How can you create that feel in the classroom?
Well, there would be certain people who would say you can't. Hence the need for intensity in all areas. I think there's really 4 things that you have to have. Student collaboration. Students have to be writing something together that is substantive, that requires revisions. You have to have fast and detailed faculty feedback, or scaffolding. Scaffolding is going to be a word a number of the speakers are going to be using. And I want you to just be sure that you understand that scaffolding just means any educational sign of support. We also need peer mentors to collaborate with me and to collaborate with the students. The peer mentors are students who are 1 or 2 years older. They took the course a couple of years ago. They're excited about it. They're interested in teaching. And because they're so close in age to students, they're in what is called the zone of proximal development, which Troy is going to explain later on. But they can speak to students in a voice that's different from mine and that often really resonates to them. So over the years, I tried to integrate, it took me 2 or 3 years to integrate all of these things into one substantive big thing called a guide that I discovered could be adaptable to any class. That was my goal. So a group of students work together to become specialists on something the class is studying. They do research and they collaboratively create a multi-drafted written guide to what we're studying with a number of discussion questions for the class, which they give to the class in advance. The class has to read it, prepare answers. And when you think about it, who's not going to answer questions that have been asked by their fellow students? They walk into class, they take over the front of the room. They're experts, they run a discussion. And by a discussion, I do not mean a boring presentation, which is what so often results from this kind of work. They're brilliant discussions because everyone is so prepared. And so that kind of close interaction in the classroom was one of the first things that made me feel I could really do this.
Can you maybe say a little bit more about the guides and how they work and how they create that sense of a learning community or a community of learners?
So I think the guides really make it real. As both faculty and students will know, virtually every writing textbook in the universe begins by saying, consider your audience. Your audience. In most instances, your audience is the teacher. So they're, it's the same person basically from one class to another. And students tend to feel that if the teacher says, oh, this is unclear, this needs more detail, well, of course they would. They know so much, you can never please them. But if another student says, I really don't understand what you're saying, could you give me an example? I don't get the point. Suddenly they think, oh, there's something wrong with my writing. Not, oh, what an overly demanding peer you are. How do you expect I should make sense? No, so students take writing so much more seriously when it's for each other. It really has a point. The second thing is motivation. When you think about it, though it's a lot of work, it's really a good deal. Because if all the drafts are handed in on time, none of them is graded. They're telling students how to improve their writing and their learning. But if you think about it, they're also telling students how to improve their grade. The third thing is there's a sustained engagement that increases all the students' belief in themselves. As faculty and as people who've been in one of these classes, I think we all know the thrill that comes from teaching a successful class where people say brilliant things that you didn't think of. And there's really a gestalt that happens that would not have happened in each person's individual mind. So that so reinforces the guide writers, but it also reinforces the rest of the class because they think, well, those guys aren't that special. I could do that too. If they did it, I could do it. And finally, there are just so many levels of collaboration. First of all, the students are collaborating with each other in the group. The students are collaborating with me and the peer mentor. The guide writing students are collaborating with the whole class. And on those discussion days, the whole class ends up collaborating with each other as they answer incredibly detailed questions posed by the guide writers. So that's enough on that, I think.
Could you say a bit more about the peer mentor and the peer mentor's role? I see a lot of people who are writing in the chat who are here. Some of them were peer mentors. Maybe you can tell us how that works.
Sure. I started off having one peer mentor. In fact, Melissa was my first purchase peer mentor, but very quickly moved to 4 per class because I didn't want the peer mentors overwhelmed, nor did I want the students to not get individual attention. Sometimes peer mentors are embedded in the class. They can help with small class discussions. Be sure that if someone makes a good point, that everybody really hears it. Check if a person hasn't been talking very much, well, what do you have to say, Brittany? But they can also work so well outside of class. And here's where you start to see the learning community come in again. Many peer mentors will invite students, everyone's living on campus for the most part, to come to the cafeteria, lunch or dinner, and meet them, maybe meet some of the people who were in the learning community a couple of years ago, and actually talk to each other as people getting to know each other, as well as students who have an assignment together. And that intersection of the living and learning really can happen around that table, even if it's a big purchase cafeteria. I guess that I would just add that they're incredibly excellent role models. They make being smart seem cool. Everybody loves their peer mentors. And I think that, on a practical level, they really push students to stick to deadlines. So they're like time management coaches in the background as well. Okay.
Great. So Kathy, you titled this talk after something that a senior auditor said in one of your classes. Can you explain that title to us?
Yes, and this was actually a class that Sam Extance and Katie Chung were in, but Katie has already said she doesn't remember the auditor. The auditor was there, but unobtrusive. So obviously this auditor, who was away for the first 2 weeks of class, when I would have explained to students how all this process worked, she comes in, she'd watch, a different group of students goes up every week, every day. They start talking, teaching the class starts answering questions. As far as she can tell, I'm sitting in the back, making the occasional comment and having a nice cup of tea. And so she says to me, like, what the heck is going on? Like, all of these students are geniuses. You know, different ones volunteer to just go up. I mean, to her, it was this magical universe. And I guess I would say that I would agree with her that all of my students are geniuses. I've learned so much from them, but I did have to let her know how much work had gone on behind the scenes to make these wonderful days possible. I want to just in closing say that I think it's in all that work, that preparatory work, that the learning really occurs. The infectiously brilliant, often thrilling classes are simply everyone's reward and my reward for such a well done job. Thank you.
So beautiful and so well stated. And I think the other reward that we clearly see here today are the lifelong relationships, right? The lifelong impact and the relationships that you've built with people that clearly, just looking at the chat, they will never forget you, and they are so appreciative of all that you have done for them. So I actually wanted to move to the next portion of our conversation and open the discussion between you and the alumni who are serving on the panel. I think you'll introduce each one as they speak, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thank you, Aviva. So we're going in order of graduation. So Melissa Schaffner is first. She graduated in 2009 in creative writing. She's an editor in the educational publishing industry and has written and edited hundreds of children's books. She took my Joyce class, and 2 years later, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, she was my first purchase peer mentor. I was in heaven. Two of us wrote an article together that almost everybody else in the room and on the panel had to read. So Melissa, you're quite famous among this group of people about the Joyce class and her role and her sense of the students, from which I learned so much. She's going to be talking about safety in community and collaboration through scaffolding, and how her focus as a student and a peer mentor on revision influenced her focus to become an editor. Okay, Melissa.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And hi, everyone. So, Kathy asked me to do this chat weeks ago, and I immediately said yes, because how do you say no to Kathy? You can't. And I really struggled at first to figure out what I wanted to talk about, because I took her Joyce class back in 2007, and it just feels like a million years ago. And I sat for a while and really had to think, what can I say? Like, this was so long ago. And I felt like such a different person back then. And like, I felt so much more outgoing in the Joyce class. And I realized that there was no, every class has like that quiet, shy person. And Kathy's classes didn't have that person. Like, that person didn't exist in a Kathy class. And I think that, that's the magic of Kathy's scaffolding. Her teaching method just, it's so involved that students don't have a choice but to be very deeply involved with all the work they're doing and the collaboration with each other. And she really, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of working together. And for a lot of people, that's really intimidating. I honestly, right now, don't think I could do it. I mean, I could, I have Kathy, but that's we had Kathy, and that's really, I think, she's just amazing. It's gonna make me cry. But yeah, the scaffolding that she put in place for her classes, and especially for Joyce, you're reading a huge book. It made a very safe learning space for everyone. And suddenly you're very invested in the work that you're doing and the research, and you're responsible for your work, but you're responsible for your group work with the guides, and then your guide, you're responsible for teaching the rest of the class. And it's an immense amount of responsibility and accountability. And Kathy just has a superpower to connect people and to connect, books to other books and chapters in the book to another chapter. And she gives students so much to connect over. And, suddenly even like the quiet little shy person in the class has 20 friends like instantly, and they can talk about anything. And she just created this very safe, comfortable environment to learn in. And it was just incredible to experience that. And then, as she mentioned, I was the first purchased peer mentor. And that, gave me the opportunity to see the connections forming between the students and myself and Kathy from the opposite side. And, I hope I did, your mentees some justice and kind of played a role in, helping them shape their futures and get through the class and everything, and find some connections. And as Kathy said, I now work in editing. I'm an editor in the educational publishing industry. And working on the guides with the students so closely was really my first jump into editing. I mean, I was a creative writing major. I think I approached Kathy's classes from a different perspective than I really think everybody else on the panel. I think they were all lit majors. And coming in with the creative writing focus, I had done critique work and feedback, but I'd never really did a developmental edit, like how Kathy, pulls out the strings and puts things together and makes connections with the text and works so deeply on really pulling the guide together and making it a whole cohesive piece that is very strong. And through that, I realized, I loved writing, but I loved helping other people with their writing more. And that, I studied publishing in grad school and got a job with a trade publisher right out of grad school and never looked back.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up is Tom DePaula, who graduated in 2010 in Lit and Philosophy. He's a PhD candidate in Urban Education Policy at the Rossier School of Education at USC. He's the co-author of the Gig Academy that came out in 2019, and several academic essays. He was in my first year learning community and in the colloquium on cultural studies. And he is going to be talking about today, creative collaboration with genuine camaraderie and balancing challenging material with students' ability to choose popular culture texts, engagement, agency, mastery. We will see, you are not the only person, but as a senior graduate student, you really know how to use the colon. We were all there.
Thanks, Kathy. This is a huge honor for me to participate on this panel, and I could take up the entire time just ranting about all of the notes of Kathy's pedagogy that have inspired me over the years. But I've had a lot of time to reflect on sort of both sides of the desk, as it were. And as you suggested, a couple things really stand out in retrospect. One important one, I think, is that we were always made to collaborate with one another in creative capacities and not just technical ones. And I think the significance of that is important because, my experience with most group projects is that, you get an assignment, you immediately create a division of labor that separates everything up into discrete tasks that each person individually works on. And then right before the presentation, you all get together and stitch it all together into one thing, right? And that really prevents a lot of the deep collaborative work that I think we were able to accomplish in Kathy's class, because we were always sort of required to select, cultural artifacts and texts, from our own sense of shared interest and to devise these clever kinds of activities and lessons based on, the kinds of juxtapositions we wanted to make, between theory and classic literature and pop culture. One that comes to mind is using Fight Club and the Scarlet Letter to explain, I think, George Lukács, right? So, I mean, these were bringing together really disparate kinds of things. And, you know, early on, I think it really did a lot to help sort of break down a lot of the disciplinary boundaries and silos that can exist in the academy, and help to sort of condition and build me and my colleagues up as, you know, interdisciplinary thinkers in general. And, you know, all of this kind of the investment over time and the extent to which we had to impute our own creative, you know, endeavors in it really created a sense of agency over the work and a sense of ownership on the topics. And, you know, I remember being genuinely excited to demonstrate how, like, notorious B.I.G. explained Althusser, right, to the rest of the class. And it created this sense of mastery because, you know, we were incorporating things about which we already knew something, but we had to analyze them in different ways and through different lenses that we hadn't encountered before. So, you know, we found that these sorts of comparisons could be really fun. And, you know, the last thing to briefly note is that the camaraderie was actually really important because, you know, Kathy gave us very high expectations with a lot of support. But, you know, none of us were sort of left out of you know, the sinking feeling when we all got a draft back that was more red than black, right? And you know, we could all just sort of look at each other and roll our eyes and say, oh, Kathy being crazy again, right? But then, you know, we would really dig in and try to figure out what it was she actually needed from us and was asking. So, you know, the commiseration and the camaraderie was like a really key dimension of all of that. And so I can expand on some of that later, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah.
Our next speaker is Amy Crior, who graduated in 2013 in literature and Spanish. For 7 years, she's been a Spanish dual language teacher in New York. She was in another LC, not mine, and she became a peer mentor for that learning community. She took a number of classes with me, but of those that we're focusing on, she took the colloquium and cultural studies, and she used work that she studied as a freshman with me. She ended up using that as part of her senior project, which was really gratifying. Amy.
Thank you, Kathy, and hello to everyone. So many familiar faces. Thank you for having me. I'm like jotting down notes, more connections that came up. I'm just going to mention how, as a teacher, I teach elementary school. What Kathy taught me as a teacher, I've been able to replicate in my classroom with much younger students. So her guides, as you know, Melissa and Tom mentioned, really develop this student agency. They put the responsibility of learning on the students themselves, which is terrifying. And certainly for younger students and freshmen coming into Kathy's classes, I know my first class with her, looking at the syllabus, I was extremely nervous and having to collaborate with students who had already been at the college for many years. Like, how is this going to work? But it did. You know, Kathy really took away from the image of the teacher as this holder of knowledge or keeper of knowledge, and then pushed that back on the students and facilitated the learning. And as Melissa mentioned, her confidence in you and her commitment to supporting you is what helped you to get through it, because she was up late at night sending you those revisions, those track edits. And her revisions, I also was a creative writing double major / minor. But Kathy really showed me that shitty first drafts, which those of us who are artists or creative writers, we know this. It's not just an artist thing, but it's also something that academic writers do. And Kathy, and actually the late Bob Stein, said, you know, you never know what you're writing about in an essay until you get to the end of the essay. And that's when you go back and you rewrite your introduction. And I had just never experienced that or heard that in high school. And I always wrote, but Kathy really drove that home. I think working on senior project with her was so gratifying by the end of it. And just like, it was a journey with her, and she was there by your side, and she really was your partner in that. And then just as a teacher now, I currently work as a 5th grade dual language teacher at a project-based learning school. So I develop inquiry-based curriculum for young children that really puts that responsibility of learning back on them in the same way that Kathy showed us how to do as students.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's lovely to think of you finding ways to bring some of this, the learning that you had. And I hope that it's partly the thrill when people responded well to a guide that is what you seek to reproduce in your own students, which is so wonderful. Thank you. Our next speaker is Andrew Yang, who graduated in 2018 in literature. He works as an instructor for the education company Axiom Learning, which is in Cambridge, Mass. He took a Joyce class with me, was a peer mentor 2 years later in the Joyce class, and also then extended his work by writing his senior project on Joyce with me. Andrew.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see some people, see everyone. I wanted to start off by saying that getting to know Kathy and participating in Kathy's Joyce class twice was absolutely a life-changing experience. When I came to Purchase, I really considered myself a math person. And while I'm still a math person, on Amy's suggestion, I took a class with Kathy and I was like, oh, James Joyce's Ulysses. Wow, that sounds cool. But I mean, I don't think I'm ready for it. And I didn't feel ready for it on the first day when I was overwhelmed by this seemingly bizarre idea of me teaching my peers Joyce's Ulysses instead of learning it from the teacher. And what I was really amazed was this whole idea of teaching in order to learn. I mean, this struck me as a really brilliant idea, and it's something that's stuck with me ever since. As a student, I found that in learning about Joyce's Ulysses, just the task of having to intensively research the subject and then having the responsibility and the shared responsibility with one's group to present this difficult material to one's peers is a phenomenally effective way to master such difficult material, especially because you have to work with many different people and communicate back and forth and make sure you're on the same page and feel confident in order to present. It's really remarkable. And not only that, but it made me fall in love with Joyce and fall in love with the connections that I was making between literature and mathematics, and that connection has stuck with me ever since. As a peer mentor 2 years later, we find ourselves in the paradoxical situation of being taught how to teach other people how to teach. And it's a really, really strange situation, but we're not only teaching, we're also learning. And because we have to explain how to communicate ideas to the class effectively, which increases our own knowledge of the material. I find that something really interesting is that Dolan and I were peer mentors at the same time, and Troy was one of the students that I helped with his guide for the Ithaca chapter. And so this whole process is really like a generational kind of interlinked cycle of pedagogical inspiration, which I find really, really empowering. In my work as a tutor, I have helped my own students teach themselves by teaching me in the process of creating guides for different subjects like trigonometry. And I find that the idea of teaching in order to learn works very well, even in a smaller scale setting, like in my tutoring. And ultimately, I find that at the end of this whole process of teaching in order to learn, I've actually learned how to teach. So I find that it's sort of my whole process has come full circle in that way. And it's definitely just changed my way of looking at learning and teaching forever.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. And I'm sure you saw there was a comment, at least one from Ellis, about what a great peer mentor you were. I think that what Andrew says is really important in terms of thinking about the relationship between teaching and learning, and that we imagine them as dichotomous when in fact they're totally interwoven. Okay, our next speaker is Dolan Wells Gallagher, who graduated in 2018 in Literature and History. She's in her final year of an MA program in Medieval and Renaissance Studies at Columbia. She hopes to begin a PhD in literature in 2022. She took Joyce and was a peer mentor 2 years later. She also took the colloquium in cultural studies, and her guide was so good that the students in the class after that, some of whom are in the audience, and Shakisha was in the class, we used Dolan's guide as a sample of an excellent guide because there were so many students who hadn't had a class with me before and were really feeling befuddled. And so we're forever grateful. Dolan is going to be talking about how track comments provide the most effective writing feedback, the magic of peer mentoring, and the versatility of guides across campus. Dolan.
Yeah, I'm just, like everyone is saying, I'm just so happy to be here. I truly don't think that I would be the person that I am today without Kathy. And just I don't think that I would necessarily be in academia. I don't know if I would have gone to grad school. I don't know how invested I would have been in the rest of my classes throughout undergrad if it wasn't for going into Joyce and getting to know Kathy and being kind of forced to be so invested in learning something. And the guide that she just mentioned, I remember when I turned in my first draft of that guide, I got back an email from Kathy that said something like, well, this isn't up to your usual standard. And I you've gotten rusty over the summer. And I was like, the worst moment of my life. I was like, no matter what, I can never let Kathy down again. I came into Kathy's classes with kind of a decent grasp on the rules of writing and grammar, but it's Kathy's line-by-line track edits address more than that. They focus on the way our papers communicated. Like a sentence might be well written, but Kathy would point out that it didn't fit perfectly into the paragraph or help clarify the concept. She really teaches you to edit properly, to be concise rather than verbose. And to not keep sentences just because you like the way they sound, but to prioritize your clear communication of your ideas. And I really knew after leaving Joyce how much I kind of grew throughout that class, but I didn't realize how much everyone else was also growing until I was a peer mentor myself. And I got to peer mentor some of the same people in their first round of draft writing at the beginning of the semester and for their later draft or their final paper at the end of the class, and really watch everyone's writing get better over the course of the class, which was something that was really incredible. And also just the universality of the guides is something that really stuck with me because I took Joyce first, and guides made sense for that because it's such a complicated text that I can't imagine learning it with less information than what we got from guides. But I got into colloquium too, and we were reading dense literary criticism, and I had no idea how the structure of learning that we used for a novel would still work. But they would just make the complex theory we were reading incredibly simple after putting it through the ringer of applying it to a piece of media. And being forced to understand each facet of it applied to different texts. There was no way that you couldn't understand what was happening. I think we can probably all relate to the feeling of being really overwhelmed by critical theory. But with the grueling detail that guides require, it really just makes everything crystal clear. Yeah. It's amazing. It's magical.
Wow. Thank you, Dolan. And again, we were so grateful, as were the students who were in that class, that they had your guide, because we spent half the time just quickly and I can see people smiling who were there, half the time quickly learning what she was telling us, and then a significant amount of time analyzing how it was written, how she did it, and what kind of audience anticipation she had to have. And I think that a lot of what Dolan just said also echoes the points that Tom was feeling about being able to choose the text to which to apply something. So our next speaker is Shakisha Levine, who graduated in 2019 in literature. She's currently working toward an MA in literature at Cooney City College in preparation for a PhD program. And she probably wouldn't tell you this, but they have a competition among all the English students, grads and undergrads, and they give a full scholarship to the best person, the best. And they chose Shakisha today. So I know, so we're all just so pleased for you. Shakisha took the colloquium in cultural studies with me and extended her work in cultural studies into her senior project with me. She's going to be talking a very interesting take on how track comments level the playing field for students who weren't taught writing skills before college, and how the synergy, this is this 12 o'clock, 3 in the morning thing, how the synergy between track commenting and multiple revisions enables students to actually learn how to write. Shakisha, take it away.
Hello. Oh, my voice is a little rusty. Hello, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone, for the congratulations. But yeah, just track commenting really kind of changed my writing dramatically. You know, I didn't go to Purchase to start. I got my associates at a community college, and then transferred in. And you know, in the high school that I went to, as well as sorry, as well as in maybe the early English classes that I took at that community college I went to, you know, basic like grammar wasn't taught. You know, they teach you like one day in elementary school, and then you never really get it again. And so, you know, a lot of times I, you know, maybe had good ideas or quality ideas, and I would turn in a paper, maybe wouldn't get the best grade, and I wouldn't understand why. And it was because I didn't have that that structure and the foundation. And working with Kathy is where I kind of got that in my last year of college. She taught me the grammar basics, but also, you know, things like using headings to organize my thoughts, and like strong pronouns and not just saying this. So things like that, as well as even like the higher writing skills, which again, you know, without, even if you have great ideas, you know, you can't just assert them. You have to, you know, give yourself time to explain and clarify arguments rather than just asserting those ideas. And that's, and through track commenting is where I learned that. I never got it anywhere else, you know, as well as the kind of multiple drafts that I did with Kathy. I worked with her on my senior project. Meant that I did something over and I did draft. I can't count how many drafts I did. And you know, it sticks with you because, you know, you have to kind of learn the structure immediately, you know, read those comments carefully, figure out what they mean, and then implement them immediately. So, you know, it's not just lost in the sauce. It's something you are learning again and again every day. And also you get to see how you learn because you have this evolving like piece of writing, and you get to see how your writing changes from beginning to end. And doing that, really, I wouldn't have been in this literature program without it, because I thought my writing was weak. And so I was planning on going for education and teaching in a non-academic, like high school or primary setting. But having that, doing my senior project with Kathy and having a piece of work, a strong piece of work, made me, you know, have the confidence to enroll in a lit program. So changed my life.
Oh, thank you so much, Shakisha, and congratulations again. I know you've all been on the edge of your seats because you've been thinking, what the hell is a ZPD? Or I know I learned it in Teaching Good Prose, but I just can't quite remember it. So finally, it's time for Troy. Troy graduated in 2019. He was a Lit and Cinema Studies major. He's currently pursuing an MA in Adolescent English Education at Hunter College. He took a number of classes with me, but of the ones we're focusing on, he was in my first year learning community. Notice only 2 of the people, so it proves that learning communities really do happen when people don't live together. But Troy was in my learning community and also in my Joyce class. And he peer mentored then in a freshman class that I was teaching. He's going to be talking about the zone of proximal development, generating work ethic, confidence, and self-sufficiency with rigorous standards, rigorous assignments, high standards, and scaffolding. Take it away, Troy. Unmute.
The pressure is on for me to explain what the ZPD is now. But firstly, echoing whatever everyone else has been saying, I'm truly honored to be here. It's especially a privilege. I'm sharing this panel with my 2 Joyce PMs, Dolan and Andrew, who are brilliant. Okay, so what is the ZPD? You're all wondering. It's the developmental sweet spot existing between what the student has mastered and what they are unable to do or understand without assistance. And so ideally, your coursework is falling just beyond your students' current abilities, and you're implementing scaffolding to support their growth. So not too difficult, not too easy, like a classic Goldilocks scenario. But like, how does this apply to Kathy's practice? We've all been talking about so far the high standards, peer mentors, track edits, Joyce room, conferences with students, like all these scaffolding supports. But the thing that I kept going back to, which I feel like is probably the most important aspect of ZPD informed instruction, which is that it sounds simplistic, but it's super important. You have to know your students, like you have to know them on a profound personal level. And I feel like Kathy was the tippy top of this this aspect of instruction, where she knew our strengths, our interests, our weaknesses, our backgrounds, and incorporated that into her instruction as methods of supporting us. And like I'm a kind of how this directly connects to is of differentiation, like if your student's a visual learner, like giving them visual aids, or how it's all built upon this. And it is an assumption because not everyone does it. You need to, like, just repeating myself, you need to understand who your students are. And I think it's profound because it's so rare. Like, you don't get that from a lot of people. And it's definitely something that I want to carry with me through my instruction. And the more personal the instruction, the better it's going to be, I think. So that's something that Kathy introduced me to, and now I'm trying to implement myself. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Troy. I think that Aviva has been listening intently and has some questions for the group as a whole. And then we'll see if we have more room for that, and then we're gonna open it up. So,
I do have questions for the group as a whole. What you said was so true and so beautiful. And Troy, what you just ended with about knowing your students, I think that that is an absolute truth, and that Kathy is the master of knowing not only her students, but her colleagues. And it's really incredible. And it's so interesting to hear how you've carried forward the lessons in your own writing, in your own grad school careers, lives. It's really amazing. I actually think that because we're running short on time, I'm going to hold off on my questions for now and see if there are questions from others who are here, if that's okay. So if you have a question, please either raise your hand or type it in the chat, and I'd be happy to moderate that.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. My name is William, and I graduated in 1998 from SUNY Purchase. I want to congratulate all of you on a job well done. I wish I had Kathy when I went to Purchase, because after what I've heard from all of you, that she's a great teacher, a great writer and everything. I graduated with a drama studies major, and I congratulate you all again. I just wish I had you guys and her as a teacher. Thank you very much.
Great, thank
you so
you.
much.
Katie, do I see your hand? Oh no, Kathleen Craig. Kathleen, please unmute.
Sorry. I feel like the oldster in the room. So I graduated in '76, guys. We were the first 4-year, and boy, oh boy, it's so amazing. It's really a pleasure to be here this evening and to hear what you have all done, what Kathy has done as an educator. One of the questions I had, going back to what Tom was sharing about the sort of the classic like way you go about working as teams. So teams are very big, of course, in business now, as we all know. And this course sounds like an absolute excellent bridge for anyone going into the business world in general. One of the things I struggled with in grad school, Tom, was I went to Yale, and this was in the 80s, and everyone was about making sure that their contribution was the most significant, right? So there was a lot of this like authorship stuff that went on. It was very, very difficult to break that down. And I think that for some of us oldsters, that definitely became sort of an ego thing. But it sounds like, you know, with technology, with the broadening of knowledge, the way we find out information, it's not about individual authorship. It's about, you know, knowing how to go through the research channels to find it quickly, to communicate it effectively, et cetera, and to have a product. But one thing that I found that was so challenging was the egos. Now, I can't imagine that did not happen, Kathy, in your classes. Were there instances of that where people were actually struggling between each other? Because that happened with us, and we thought we were being so effective and learned in the work we were doing, which, by the way, was public health, not even literature, but I was a lit major. And I tell you, it was just the most maddening process.
Do you want to take that question?
Sure.
Curious.
At first I thought it was going to be for Tom, but
well, it's for both of you.
I would say that one of the things, and this maybe is a cheat for you from your standpoint, each student worked on a separate umbrella area. So while they had to have strands of thought running through, somebody had to be like just for example, in the Joyce class, primarily responsible for talking about the style, since each chapter is written in a different style. Somebody had to talk about production, which is all the historical stuff that's going on, as well as Joyce's life, all of the things that could have possibly influenced the novel. Someone had to talk about reception, the changing interpretation of the chapter over time, so that while they had to keep in touch with each other all the time, they were actually writing separate parts. I think that I certainly, I know I drive enough people mad, but I would be driven mad, and I have been when I've had to actually co-author sentences with somebody else, so that having different areas is one of the first level things that kept away the any sense of competition. But also I think that people felt that the guide would be stronger if every section was really good. So consequently, they helped each other, and they weren't competing, because I knew that somebody was writing about style and somebody else was writing about. So that's probably one way. Tom, do you think there were other things in colloquium?
Well, I mean, as a general point that I would just add, I think is that, ego tended to dissolve a bit because the context that we were working in really promoted the fostering of intellectual friendships. And, I'm someone who firmly believes in the social process of learning. I don't think it's a discrete individual kind of activity. I think it's something that happens, the best outcomes happen when we're learning things collectively, and when we're sharing expertise and riffing on one another, right? So to that extent, when we had opportunities to be creative together and to discover for ourselves things that interested us, and then to try to get the rest of the class, or to get Kathy even herself interested in something, that maybe she didn't know about, I think it did a lot of the legwork in helping to kind of dissolve some of those ego problems that can happen in conventional group work, where people are trying to stand out over and against one another. I don't recall having quite that experience, because we were all kind of, in a foxhole together, right? And that, that builds camaraderie. So,
I totally agree with you, Tom. I had an earlier thought, but I thought I wouldn't say it. But that if you really genuinely create assignments that are too hard for one person to do on their own, most of us can remember being in collaborative groups where we just did the assignment because we wanted it to get an A, and we knew that we could guarantee that we would do that kind of work, but we couldn't trust the other people. This is just too big. It has to be divided up. And so again, Tom's point that you really are, you develop a sense of really wanting to try to help each other achieve rather than pull each other down. There's like no motivation for that.
There's some great comments in the chat too, from Jamie and Jordan and from Andrew about how collaboration is fostered. So you can take a look at that. Decio, do you have a question?
Hi everyone. Hi, Kathy. I actually had to just come here and say thank you, because your teachings go so much beyond the subject that you are actually treating. It's stuff that stay with us forever. And I just hope that you always take with you that you help change people's lives, and you have changed mine. And I am forever grateful to have been part of your class and your life for a period of time. So for that, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Decio. It's just so wonderful to see you. And I just want everyone to know, because each of you is famous in a different way. Decio is the one who did the Wandering Rocks crossword puzzle. See, this is where there's always a fun piece, like the majority report has the fun half, but we have a fun piece. So everyone's learning all sorts of things, but then suddenly there's this crossword puzzle, and it was Xeroxed to make it look old because it was a throwaway in the chapter. I remember this like it was years ago, but he crumpled up the paper and then Xeroxed the paper, and we each got crossword puzzle. I mean, not crossword puzzles. Yeah, crossword puzzles. We each got a crossword puzzle, and different groups have won different things, but it was just incredible. And almost everyone has experienced your crossword puzzles. But it just does show that there were so many different ways in that I don't really feel that there was ever much of a sense of competition, which I also do think is also a little top down. The teacher can really stifle that if they see it. And you know, if I have to, my husband always says a woman can get away with more than a man can. Morris, you might agree in terms of things that you say to students, but that if somebody starts having a lot of ego, it just seems important that the teacher just cut that off, just stop it, because it just impedes learning. And, you know, we're not interested in that.
It's great. I also like how you just demonstrated, this is totally true because I've spoken to Kathy many, many times over the past couple months, how Kathy remembers each and every one of you so specifically and so clearly. And that speaks to, I think, what Troy was saying before about the really knowing your students and then remembering them for years. Professor Kaplan.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I had to arrive late. I just want to, since egos have been mentioned, I want to tell you what most of you have already learned by now. They're not absent from the faculty, and collaboration is not something that happens very much with faculty. And one of the things that I've admired regarding Kathy over many years now was her generosity. When she had good students that she got involved with, whom she thought might enjoy philosophy, she not only sent them, she sent an email, she dropped in my office to say, oh, so-and-so is really very, very good. And so over the years, we had a number of students in common. And a couple of things I learned about that. One was I could never understand, but maybe I'm getting it a little better after what I've heard this afternoon. Kathy has you working very, very hard. Like me, and yet you love her. And you know, that's a very hard thing to pull off. I learned more about all that because among the students that we shared, a few of them turned out to be double majors, and we co-supervised senior projects. Tom DePaula is one of our most celebrated alumni in that regard. But I'm sorry to say this publicly, Tom has a stubborn streak. He go along with critical suggestion. He was good at, in our one-on-one meetings, at suggesting that, well, giving him different advice. And I just wondered all this. So Kathy and Tom and I met in Starbucks. And that was a collaborative conversation. I can still picture it and remember some of it. And guess what? Kathy and I were much closer than had been intimated. But there are lessons here about collaboration. And for me, the lesson, Kathy's office was right next to mine in the humanities office. And we both would talk at length with students, which means we couldn't avoid eavesdropping on each other. And it was just wonderful hearing Kathy interact with students. And when we knew the student in common, then we had really interesting collaborative conversations. So thanks, Kathy. I really miss you.
Great. Thank you so much, Morris. Anybody else have questions, comments? We have about 5 more minutes.
I think there was a question in the chat for Kathy that was, what's next for you?
Oh, all right. Well, my first novel, Dodging Satan, did very well. I'm most proud of the fact that it was shortlisted for the Rubery Award, which is an international award for books that aren't published by the Big Five. I was the person in fiction. They choose one person. So there's one poet, one fiction writer, one nonfiction writer, and maybe memoir and autobiography. And I was the fiction person. So I feel like I've gotten, I haven't made money, but I didn't go into this to make money. That was never a thought. But I have probably written about a dozen news stories, written and published, written about 20, but published about a dozen news stories for the next book. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. And what I said to me and to my students is that I may have retired, which just means I'm not taking in any more students, but I really have a lot. I mean, I wrote over 20 letters of recommendation last semester. So part of what's next is a continuation, without a paycheck, without new classes and new students. But, one of the things that I tried to make a good deal, it's hard to promise people something in the future, but is to just say that, I'll be with you for life if you stick with me. And I promise that it's true. So I feel that I would put Morris in this category as well. When you're close with your students, like you always have them. So it's like so wonderful to see all of you. But it's just so great to get like a message on your phone out of the blue. And I know Morris would feel this way. And whether it's a letter of recommendation or just I just read this article and it reminded me of Althusser. It's just wonderful. So more of the same, a little more gardening. At the moment, no traveling, but hopefully that's going to change. We're vaccinated and ready to go when we're accepted. But the US still isn't in a lot of places. The EU is accepting us now, though. And a little more gardening, and just for fun, when I'm listening to podcasts or audiobooks, I've now gone back to crocheting. So I made, but I do it with irony. So I made an overly decorated Easter basket with all sorts of flowers and things, and colored some Easter eggs with blueberries, and put that on the table because you're supposed to do something during lockdown that's weird. So I do tablescaping, but I don't think that's in my future for the long term.
That's great. Kathy, we're going to save the chat so you can see it. You have such beautiful, beautiful comments from many people here, and I know other people have written to you directly. So we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank Melissa, Tom, Amy, Andrew, Dolan, Shakisha, and Troy for the work that you put into this. I told you this before. I know you have lives, you have work, you have graduate school, and yet you came back to do this sort of final class with Kathy and email with her in the middle of the night for the past couple of weeks. We're so appreciative of your being here. I know that you enjoyed it, but it was a lot of time on your part. So thank you for that. And Kathy, I mean, what can I say? You hired me, right? You mentored me, and I would never have accomplished anything that I've accomplished without you. So thank you for that. And I think I really speak for everybody to say that we love you, and we really appreciate you, and we wish you the best. And we know that we'll be in touch. So.
Thank you so much, Aviva. If I can just say one thing, Aviva was trying to determine things that she could do for my retirement. And I said, I absolutely did not want a dinner. I didn't want anyone getting up and feeling they had to go to dinner because they knew someone else was going and then saying something nice that they didn't really mean. I didn't want a dinner. I came to be mentioned at graduation. So COVID comes, so there's no possibility of getting together. There's no graduation at all. And Aviva was clever enough to find a way to get me to do something to mark my retirement. And I think that is just incredible, because I thought I had all guards up, but you managed to get me to do it. So
and of course it's one last class, right?
Of course, yes. It's just more
that makes you happiest.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. This is so incredible. So thank you. So we're going to get, I think, a hard cutoff, which just means we're going to be cut at 7:15. They have to go on to the next person. So we just—
Kathy, if people want to talk to you, how can they get in touch? Facebook, is that the best place to
Facebook,
start?
or I still have my purchase email, Kathleen.mccormick@purchase.edu, but you can get me on Facebook, LinkedIn in a pinch if you can't find anything else. You can always go to my website, Kathleen Z McCormick at KathleenZMcCormick.com. Thank you again so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us and joining Kathy this evening. Unfortunately, we do have 2 other programs starting right now, and so have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.